A podcast of one's own, challenging the status quo, keeping feminist discourse in the limelight, striving for gender equality. Hello everyone and welcome to our 5th episode of A Podcast of One's Own. I hope you've been following it up until now and that you've enjoyed everything that we've spoken about. Get in touch if there's anything you'd like us to cover or if you would like to feature on our podcast. This week we are discussing the concept of being a bad feminist or bad feminism, and I was joined by our fabulous president Esther, who's very well versed in the subject and she gives wonderful reading material. We covered a lot of ground, the age-old adage of feminism in makeup. We discussed cosmetic surgery, cancel culture, calling out, engaging in discourse and activism surrounding feminism. And again, we tied it all in with our personal experiences. Covered religion as well. There was so much to discuss, and yeah, we went a lot over time, so we're going to turn this into 2 episodes. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and we hope you find this meaningful, relatable, enjoyable, and tune in to our next podcast. So, without further ado, let's just dive in. We're doing this podcast on being a bad feminist.
Yes. So it's me and Nicole. It's Ester and Nicole, and we're going to talk about the session that we did on bad feminism.
How would you describe the term itself, Esther?
For me, it's like I'm a little bit conflicted because I don't want to. I think it is it could be harmful to start talking about yourself as being bad at stuff, but especially in the feminist movement that we're already so down on ourselves. But bad feminism for me, I feel like, is just reclaiming the fact that you can't be perfect in anything that you do, and that includes activism. And I think I actually came across the term first by reading the book, or the collection of essays, Bad Feminist, by Roxane Gay, who's a feminist author and activist, and she's just amazing. But that was a collection of essays that brought up a lot of different perspectives on probably things that we as women and feminists engage in that might not necessarily help our cause, that might be actually, stabbing ourselves in the back a little bit.
Even harmful to some extent.
Yeah, that it's not. We are oppressed in society under the patriarchy, but we're also sort of perpetuating a lot of these structures ourselves. Most of the time subconsciously, but a lot of the time, the more you sort of learn about feminism and the more open you are to all the different systemics of it, you start realizing that you're yourself actually contributing to upholding these structures as well. And I wanted to do a session on it just because I feel like it's really important to forgive yourself for sometimes caving under all these stereotypes and pressures, even though you want to break them eventually.
Yeah, and we talked about it last week with the gender and music session, and we will also with gender and film that's coming up next week, with regards to chick flicks and how they're supposed to be made for women, but so much of them are completely problematic. And you sort of think that you enjoy them, and then you get wrapped up in all these motifs that they continue, which are completely problematic and reinforce these really negative ideals. And now when I find myself looking back on old favourites, films that I loved growing up, and now I can't.
Sometimes I rewatch them, and then I'm like, wow, I'm really not enjoying this anymore, because I just see all of these harmful stereotypes and thematics about that just reinforce, or it doesn't even have to be actively reinforcing, just that I'm tired of seeing things that are not actively challenging patriarchal structures. I'm like, we need to be active all the time. We can't sit back, because not actively engaging in it is, sort of allowing it to happen. To me. But yeah, in the session we talked about a lot of things. We tried to divide it up a little bit between like cultural things, just like you were saying, movies, music, TV shows. But we also talked about makeup, the use of makeup, and body correction in any sort of type of way, like in terms of what's it called? Surgery, like what's it called? Like plastic surgery. Cosmetic surgery. Mm-hmm. That was what I was looking for. We looked a little bit about at the history of makeup in the feminist movement, and the how the approach to women wearing makeup and feminists wearing makeup has changed over the course of between the different waves of feminism, which I found really interesting, especially because I feel like I think about it a lot as well, personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was like introduced by second wave feminists, and that was in the 60s and 70s, and then reclaiming feminism and the term girl sort of came around in third wave feminism, and the female punk band Riot Girls are considered to play a really big part in bringing that.
Yeah, they're like, we're not just women, we can be girls as well. Like, second wave feminism was, they were the first ones to sort of start challenging the idea of wearing makeup, because it was submitting to a culture of oppression and trying to please people that were actually that were actually exploiting them as well, and it's repressing women because it sets you up to first of all just spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, so I listened to this podcast, and they put forward the theory that essentially the cosmetic industry and the beauty industry really started hammering it in after the war, and so there was like this like women's liberation where women went into the workforce and suddenly they enjoyed working and they wanted to be out of the familial home and started demanding more equality in that regard. And then there was this huge boom in the beauty industry, and you can look back at all these adverts in the UK as well that are so surreal about romanticising like the domesticated homebird.
I mean, really just looking at adverts from like the 50s and 60s is actually surreal, like in terms of anything, but just like the rhetoric in them as well. It's like nothing is. I mean, I understand as well that cultures change, and at that point they haven't gone through all of these steps that we have with feminism, so obviously they would have a different perspective. But sometimes I look back and I see what people just let happen. I'm like, surreal. How can you let this come out of your mouth? Do you not realize that this is like extremely offensive to some extent? Like,
yeah, it just seems so far removed from what we experience today as well. Yeah, that you have to laugh, but that was the reality. This picture perfect woman at home who was cooking, cleaning, looking after the children, and also looked fabulous all the time, and just spent all this time on self-care. And so last May I done like no shave, no makeup May, and that was the first time in my life I'd even spent that amount of time. Yeah, and it was really, really difficult. Before that, I would have never gone to the shops without makeup on, and it was excruciating. The first couple of weeks, I was like head down. Yeah. I wouldn't talk to people. I was like mumbling at customers in my work because it was like, whoa. Yeah. And that was like completely transformative. But during that time, I was like sort of like assessing how long I'd spent doing my makeup, and I started wearing like full face of makeup around about age 12, and I would get up at 6 a.m. to get ready to leave for school at 8, and I worked out like the amount of hours I'd spent over a decade was like I had spent a minimum of half an hour a day for a decade. That is so long. Doing my hair. I could be a rocket scientist. Yeah, you know?
But like, that's also what the second wave feminists were like trying to bring forward. They're like, this is something this is a tool that's used to distract women from spending their time more wisely. Like, this is something that, let's give them this, that they occupy their time so they can't do anything actually meaningful and like take up space in society properly. And obviously I'm not saying that a man sat down and said this, but that's the way that the structures sort of evolve. Like, it really just distracts our attention to completely, like, totally non-important things, like just appearance in general. But what we talked about in the session was that you can get yourself caught up in this really, really horrible sort of situation where you can't, you can like, if you challenge it, then you're at a disadvantage. And that's what it was. I think it's important to talk about this, because being a feminist doesn't mean that you never sort of cave in and do these things anyway. Like, I will wear makeup if we talked about, for example, a lot of personal experiences were brought up. And for example, if you like going to job interviews, going to just like being working, say you work in service, if you work, like, I notice, like, if I wear makeup and make an effort, I will make a lot more tips. Like, there are things like that. And even just, I think, getting into, it's already difficult, for example, for to get hired in any sort of space, but especially male dominated spaces. But then say you go for a job interview, and the other applicant looks really, really nice, very like well put together, wearing makeup and stuff. I think it's not
that
necessarily
is gonna affect your chances.
it is going to affect your chances to get the job if you show up, even if you're wearing like nice, clean, good like clothes. But if you don't wear makeup and the other person does, it's not necessarily that the employer is going to sit down and think, well, maybe they're that kind of person that goes,
oh, she's hot.
oh, she's wearing makeup, she actually made an effort. Or it might be subtler than that. It might just be like a subconscious thing, that it is just a reaction to what you find attractive. And then we're so conditioned to think that a face with makeup is so much more,
There's so much more worth.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that I feel like it's difficult to kind of get away from this perpetuation of beauty ideals in that sense. Because do I not put on makeup to challenge this, then I'm also putting myself up for failure in other areas. And maybe I could make more of an improvement if I actually do put on my makeup, get that job, do it well, and work from there. But like, at the same time, you don't want to do that. You don't want to minimize yourself in order to, like, it's really tough to have to accept that.
And there are so many studies as well, like psychological studies, that have shown that people who are more attractive are less likely to get long prison sentences, or so it impacts the way that people react to you.
Yeah.
And the like relationships, or at least encounters that you have with people on a daily basis. I had one job where I got the job and I was cashing up. It was like 2-3 weeks later, and I was in the office and I found my CV, and he had just written fit in permanent marker, giant like capitals right across my whole CV.
Oh my god.
And underlined it. It was like fit or tidy or something ridiculous like that. And I was just sitting there and I was seething. My face went red, and there was the duty manager came down and he seen me looking at it, and he was like, "Oh, look at you, you're blushing." And I was like, "No, I'm seething with rage."
That's
and then,
crazy.
We had a girl come in with her CV, and I was chatting to her, and then I went to tell the manager, and he was like, "But was she fit though?" And I was like, "She's got a really good CV, she's got loads of experience." And he was like, "But was she fit though?" And I was like, "Look, this is completely irrelevant." And I was just so angry. And
so inappropriate.
And that's clearly how he assessed me when I came in with my CV.
That's horrendous.
I know.
Oh, that would make my stomach just,
yeah, it makes you sick, doesn't it?
And obviously then if you see that, that's going to like stay with you as well. To be like, oh, well, I, like, obviously you're very, about the structure, so you can challenge it. But a person who's not very aware or self-aware or just educated on the topics, that like seeing something like that would affect them for like the rest of their professional life, and be like, no, but I have to make an effort to look beautiful for my employer
so I can get a job.
It's just horrible. But it is also one of those things, like almost everyone in in our society, like in our, like, in GenSoc, it's so difficult with the word society. I mean, a lot of us wear makeup. And I don't necessarily think that, I don't know, the whole point of reclaiming the word, the notion of being a bad feminist is that, yeah, like, I do wear makeup, and I know that is probably reinforcing oppressive structures. And I mean, I do feel a little bit bad about that sometimes. But as long as I'm aware of it, I think that's the first step to actually go against it.
Yeah, I feel like the awareness doesn't always work in your favour, though. I've got quite a tumultuous relationship with makeup, and I'll go through different phases, and then especially after I'd done the, like, month without any makeup on, and then at the end of, like, the 30 days, I instantly put on a full face.
Yeah, and just like,
and I felt amazing. I felt so much better, and I was like, shit, I thought I was going to be like, oh no, what is this on my face?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to do this anymore, but instantly I was back in my comfort zone, and yeah, it's a difficult one to get your head around.
I've tried to do it in the way that when I realize, because I go into phases as well, and I do really like makeup, not necessarily because I find, like, a lot of the time I think we tell ourselves that we use makeup as art, and we're like, oh no, but it's just a creative outlet and blah blah, and like for some people I'm sure that it is, but it is also not. It's also a tool that is really, like, restricting women and girls. But I go in phases as well with how much makeup I wear and what type of makeup I wear. But I've tried to be really aware of when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, do I feel like I need to wear makeup right now? Like, would I feel slightly uncomfortable not doing it? I probably should just go without makeup today. Because I need to, like, check myself to do that. Because I don't want to do it. Yeah. Like, I don't want to ever feel like I can't, for example, show up to work without makeup. That's really important, I think. But we also talked about, what was I? Yeah, we did touch on it a little bit, music and film. And I was drawing back to, because we screened at the session a TED Talk by Roxane Gay, who wrote Bad Feminist, and she brings it up as well, music and TV shows, and especially, like, sitcoms, soap operas, any sort of reality TV. I mean, a lot of them are really, like, just straight up sexist, like, very, very, I think one of the, can I find, no, I can't.
And they seem so overt now, but that is again because we've spent so much time learning and training ourselves to recognize these things, that it is really sad to think that we were at a point when that would go over our heads and we just thought that it was completely normal. Yeah. And that's why it's so shocking going back to those old classics that you loved.
Like, it happened to me just a few weeks ago. It was when the Royal Rumble was on, and which is like, because I didn't know before I watched it, because it was at one of my friend's house. He was like, oh, just everyone come over, we'll just, like, have some drinks and watch the show.
What is it?
It's like, I'd never heard of it before, but it's a wrestling competition, but it's all set up, like, it's all scripted, so but they're real fighters. It's just that they have, like, beforehand, it's all decided before who's going to win what and whatever. But they've, like, made it like a whole show for weeks, like, promoting it as if it, like, you know, it's very, right now with social media, it's, like, out in the open, but when it started, it was kind of, like, not really clear whether or not it was scripted or not. But, like, so they all know who's going to win before and all that. Like, it's very, like, it's pre-choreographed. Like, they've like practiced the matches and stuff like that. But there's just, as soon as the show came on, I just felt like, oh, fuck, like, oh shit. Beep. Censoring that. I just felt like I'm not gonna enjoy this at all. Like, this is just looking at it and the way they were, especially the way they were dressed and the way they were, I mean, both the men and the women were wearing like next to nothing, but clearly that has different implications for men and women. I mean, there was one part of it that was, it was set up being 30 wrestlers were supposed to come in to the same, it was like every 30 seconds a new fighter came into the ring. And then, but then they could like sort of heave each other out, and then they were out. But technically, 30 people could have been in the ring at the same time, and they were all women, and they were all fighting in like basically bikinis, and they were like full faces of makeup, looked like actual dolls. And I'm like, no one would. First of all, no one would do that as like an actual wrestler. Like you don't get dressed up like that in that sense. Like, I don't know, maybe they do. I don't really watch wrestling, but it seemed like the extreme version of like I don't know, like just like the whole idea of like a cat fight, of women just fighting, looking sexy, like
in
also like
inconvenient clothing.
And also really like shouting at each other, like really like being so rude to each other, like calling each other names, and like it was just such a toxic whole thing, and I fucking enjoyed it. You know, like part of me was like, this is horrible, I can't believe I actually want to watch this, but I sat until the end and I was like, oh my god, I really hope she wins. Like, I got my favorite, I want her to win. Like, I got so into it while I sat there being like, this is horrendous.
Like, this is ridiculous.
I can't believe it's on TV. And I think that really sums up what I mean about being a bad feminist. Like, I might be at fault for actually keeping it on the TV, but I'm not at fault for sort of enjoying it. And I also think it's really important to remember that the more you learn, the more averted you're going to feel. The more, like, it goes with music as well. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, I'll forgive myself for listening to some misogynistic songs if they were made a really long time ago, during a time when it was just not, people didn't understand what it was. But then I also noticed that sometimes when I listen to them, I'm like, you know what, I don't want to listen to it.
It's too
like,
much.
Like, I get that it's a bop, but I think you've reached a really important milestone when you notice that it's not difficult to just not include that in your life anymore.
And everyone's on a spectrum as well. You get to a point where you're like, no, I just can't do this anymore, I need to turn this off. You keep raising the bar and adjusting it to yourself, as long as you do it with that awareness. But yeah, I've been told that, like, I can't take a joke anymore, or that I need to, like, relax, and that I always take things so seriously when it comes to things like that. And my work and the chefs will be playing music, and it was like this rap song that was just so horrific, just like the worst you could imagine, like rapey and violent and horrible. And then, of course, right away I was like, I'm not listening to this, turn it off. And they're all like, oh, look at the feminist in the room, like, oh, and you're like, please.
Or like, yeah, I'm a feminist, but also, why are you defending this? Like, that's really a lot of the time whenever I do things that I might be like, this is not really great. The longer I go being engaged in feminism, the easier it is to just cut it out. Like, it's not something that I miss. Like that song, that album, that artist.
Not like
I'm
you've
like,
given it up and you're
no,
like,
I'm like, you know what? No, like, I can totally boycott this. I don't actually. There's tons of other music that I can listen to that's not misogynistic.
And so we're going to wrap up part 1 of the podcast here. I hope you enjoyed tuning in. And again, please get in touch if you found anything that we discussed interesting or controversial, if you agree or disagree, and tune in for part 2 of the podcast. Have an amazing day, everyone.